So good afternoon. My name's Mary Jennings. I'm on the board of directors for Friends of Prescott, which is the nonprofit that supports the Prescott Community Center and things that are here in the center. We're so happy that you're here today because it's the intent of Prescott to preserve this building by creating activities in it that will sustain it as a historic asset. It was built in 1927. We're going to have a celebration soon after it burned down much earlier. And not only that, but provide space for nonprofit and for-profit companies that are here in the building. So welcome, because we also want to not only have programs that we charge money for, because that is how we pay the rent to the town of Groton for rent of this building, but we really try to create events such as this for the community that are free of charge. We try to balance it. We are a community organization trying to model what a community center could be in the town of Groton. So that's who we are. We have a couple upcoming events I want to announce. Monday night, we have Citizen General, retired General Bruce Zukakis, who's doing a panel at 7 o'clock here on NATO, for which he worked, and he's doing a presentation on the history of NATO and its current involvement with Ukraine. So it's not too late to register for that. And then, of course, we're going to have our second Winterfest, which during COVID last year, we had the first weekend in December, which is December 3rd. So look forward to those two events. The topic of diversity. It's a topic that Groton and surrounding communities have tried to address, I know ever since I've been here, and I've been here only 21 years, and it's a topic worth addressing for many years to come. The schools, the town of Groton and Dunstable and others, and faith-based organizations have always had a commitment to accepting and supporting all peoples in their institutions, in their population. We can always remember, for example, Groton's work with granite markers. All are welcome. So the whole issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion is not new. But what has been happening since then, since probably George Floyd's death, but before, is that the schools, the town, and faith-based institutions have been institutionalizing groups to address the issues in a way that we haven't seen before, to address immediate needs and also long-term needs. I want to acknowledge that there are many groups that address diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are some on Facebook, there are some on Instagram, there are some in your neighborhood. Please forgive me, because in putting together this panel, I invited only those groups that I knew were institutionalized, and not the people institutionalized here, but the groups that had permanent groups that I was aware of. So I know there are many, and maybe if we have another panel, we'll see who those are. I want to introduce you to our panelists and then tell you a little bit about the format. I'll start on your left. First, we have James Moore, who is a member of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for the town of Groton. Next is Raquel Majeski, who is from Lawrence Academy, and she's the assistant head of Equity and Community Life at Lawrence Academy. Next, Allison Chase. Allison is the co-chair of the Racial Justice Ministry Group at the First Parish Church of Groton. Next, Rafi Glad. Rafi is on the school committee of the Groton-Dunstable Regional School District and is also a member of the DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for the district. Next to him is his cohort, Andrew Hurley, who is the coordinator of the DEI committee. And it's on the staff at Groton Dunstable Regional School District. And finally, Sarvani Sendas, who is the Dean of Diversity and Inclusion at the Groton School. So welcome all. Give them a nice warm welcome. And thank you so much for volunteering your time on this lovely fall day to come inside. And thank you for attending. So we're going to have some questions to the panel for about 45 minutes. Not every question is going to be answered except the first one by all panelists. So we'll start with that, and we'll see what we can do in 45 minutes and leave time for you with questions and answers. So first, I've asked each panelist in about 2 or 3 minutes each to describe the mission and the membership of your group, including when it or your position was formed. So we'll start off with James and the town of Groton.
Hello, everyone. So the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee originally started as the Diversity Task Force. We just changed the name this summer. Our mission, and if you don't mind, I'll just read you our charge. The main goal of this committee is to recognize and commemorate the diversity of the residents of Groton, past and present. To do so, the committee will examine our town for areas of unequal representation within our public institutions and spaces, both explicit and implicit, while also creating opportunities to celebrate our diversity as a community. The committee will provide research-based observations and recommendations to the Select Board, focus on the education of our residents, and commit to open dialogue and engagement with our residents. I think the important thing to note about this committee is that we were created by the Select Board, and we are basically an advisory committee. We advise to the Select Board. We don't have any power. So, if you want to think of it that way. But we do have a direct connection to the Select Board, and we have their ear. Hopefully, we also have the ear of our town, so that we can make strong recommendations to the committee.
Thank you, James. Next, Raquel.
Hi, so I'm Raquel Majeski. I'm the Assistant Head of Equity and Community Life at Lawrence Academy. My position has been in place, or I've been at Lawrence Academy for the past 6 years. But Lawrence Academy has been in the town of Groton for 230 years. We've always had a commitment to equity and inclusivity. We've always, hopefully, have been on the elm tree shaded hillside, making a difference and inviting community members within. Our focus and the mission at our school is we recognize you for who you are and inspire you to take responsibility for who you want to become. So the mission that engulfs and embodies everything that we do and stand for is alive and well for our students, for our community, and it shapes all of the strategic decisions that we make. So I serve on the Senior Leadership Council. I work and put strategic barriers and opportunities in place for all of the folks in our community. So from students to faculty to staff, I design professional growth and development. And we don't believe that it's this one-off thing. Diversity is who we are, and it's the lens in which we make all of our decisions at Lawrence Academy.
Thanks, Raquel. And next is Allison.
Hello. So I'm representing the Racial Justice Ministry team, which is a volunteer committee within the church. And we don't, to my knowledge, have a specific charter. It is evolved. The group was started in around 2015. There's an evolution from the killing of Michael Brown to the formation of a working group and then eventually our committee. So we have been working within our church community to investigate our biases, I guess, as a community, and we've done so with small groups, which are sort of a forum, less than 10 people, 8 to 10 people, where we go through sort of a curriculum of materials to really start to educate, first of all, and open people's eyes, especially prior to the murder of George Floyd. A lot of people didn't know about things like redlining and a lot of the historic injustices within our system and why Groton is the way that it is now. So, so there was a lot of sort of eye-opening within our community, and the group has spawned some other types of ministries where people have gone out and worked within the community or within their own places of business. And then we've just continued to keep that charter of unpacking what it is, what privilege is, what whiteness is, and how can we, one of the charters as a church is to deepen spiritually, to take care of one another, and be a blessing to the world. So how can we do that from the lens of racial justice? So that's our...
Thanks, Allison. And next is Rafi, speaking for, along with Andrew, Groton Dunstable.
Thank you. So the DEI Advisory Committee for the school district is similar to the DEI Advisory Committee for the town of Groton. Our charge is just more in the scope of students and what happens every day behind our buildings. But we are looking mainly at a way to make all students have the same opportunities, no matter race, religion, income, anything across the board. You know, at Groton Dunstable, we want to, like our surrounding areas, make everyone feel accepted and welcomed at our schools. And that's the whole point of education, I believe. So we were technically formed in response to some of the events of 2020, but as the DEI coordinator of the district can attest to, we are still in talks and we are still trying to iron out our very charge, which we hopefully will be wrapping up in the coming weeks at the next school committee meeting. So stay tuned. Thank you.
Hi, and Andrew, if you could mention a little bit about your position and also the work of the DEI committee.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. I was brought into the community my first days. I think were either in August or September 2021. So it's pretty new of a position in a way of thinking and a charge in our district. Sorry. Hello. It's I started in the district in September and August of 2021. So, you know, thinking about and working in ways that cultivate inclusivity and cultivate a greater equitable outcome and experience for all students is something that has started before I arrived at the district, but I think I'm trying to help in solidifying that and codifying the processes and structures for ensuring that it is the case. In thinking about the district and what we're hoping to accomplish, I wrote, we're trying to cultivate an environment and a community in which every person experiences belonging and every person values and accepts each other member of our community and the diversity therein. Through this, to achieve this, we're seeking to identify, understand, and challenge the bias and inequity in our policies, practices, and ways of thinking and being. And I think that's how we talk about DEI in the committee and in the district as a whole.
Thank you, and next is Shravani.
Hello, my name is Shravani Sandas, and I'm from the Groton School. I'm the Dean of Diversity and Inclusion there, and my position was created with the incoming headmaster, Tamba Makibala. I think it was about 2013, 2014. Before that, diversity inclusion work was not institutionalized. It was more sort of an informal grouping of faculty who are interested in the experience of our students, and we'd get together. And it was kind of process ridden because it started with, we got in a climate survey group called Ed Change, I think, if I remember right. They suggested creating this position. Rick Commons, the headmaster, was going out. Tamba Makiwala was coming in, and he asked me to do it. I'm primarily an English teacher. I've been at Groton for 23 years now. We've been there a long time, and so this was something I took on along with my the D&I position. But Groton's unusual, I think, in the sense that I am working with a headmaster whose clarion call, whose very mission is diversity inclusion. So I work closely with him. He takes care of the structural overall work of diversity inclusion. I mean, I'll go into that detail later. I work more on the internal work of the school, curriculum, student experience, faculty professional development, creating a culture of belonging. That's the way we've divided up the job, and that's the way we work together. So.
Thank you so much for clarifying your positions, your institutions, and your mission. They all are a little different, so we can hopefully understand that as we listen to responses. So the first question, and I've asked certain people to lead off each question, is about George Floyd's murder. George Floyd's death on May 25th, 2020, marked a change in racial and diversity viewpoints in many areas of the United States. How did your group respond to this event? And we'll start out with James.
Well, I can't say that we responded to the event because we weren't created until afterwards, but I would say that we were created mostly because of the murder of George Floyd and the racial reckoning that followed it. We weren't here until that happened. So I would say that the Select Board saw the need, saw the awareness, saw the climate of the country, and decided to act on having a committee available to start discuss these types of issues. They were big issues, as we all know, at the time, and still are. And I imagine it would be difficult for the Select Board itself to just focus on such issues. So the creation of a committee, then we called it a task force. And I think that was appropriate. There was an immediacy about it. Although I don't want to say there's still not immediacy. We still have issues and problems. But I do think the change to a committee made sense. It gives us, in some ways, more time to breathe, more time to think, more time to use the learning we have had in the last 2 years to make conscious, smart decisions.
Anyone else like to respond to that question about George Floyd's murder and the aftermath?
Mine's going to be a little lengthy. Sorry, everyone. It's interesting. I first won my seat on the school committee for the town of Dunstable in July 2020. My colleague at the time, the other Dunstable representative, wrote and borrowed a race resolution that was adopted by our market basket districts and all of the school districts surrounding us. I would have to say that meeting was a little bit tense. There are some colleagues that did not believe that resolution needed to be anywhere here. But I'm happy to report at the end of that long discussion, it was a 7-0 vote in the affirmative to have that resolution here. From that came the Groton Diversity Task Force. And we thought, as a regional district in the town of Groton, we should also have some sort of seat at the table. We elected a representative who sat on that committee, which was incidentally enough myself. And I sat there and worked with the committee for, I would say, the first few months. Unfortunately, that committee is sanctioned by the town of Groton, and we are a regional school district. Granted, I am from Dunstable. But I talked to my colleagues, and I talked to the current chair of the DEI task force at the time, Raquel Majeski, and said that, unfortunately, I think our services could be offered in another capacity. So the school committee, along with hammering it out, decided to make our own DEI advisory committee. We wrote a charter, and it is currently still in the works today. I took over as chairman of that committee in June. And with the help of our DEI coordinator, we are going to get it done. And the work that the committee is going to do is similar to what James alluded to. It's simply advising the district and the superintendent on these matters. It is up to them to decide whether to take those advice and either implement them or find a way that it will work here. But our role is strictly that, an advisory committee. So that is the response of the school committee for this district from the aftermath. Thank you.
Anyone else that choose to answer this particular question? Yeah.
As far as we are concerned, I think the summer of 2020 was, from my perspective, really pushed the work forward. Schools of our type have committees, and committee work can be slow, but there was, we had what other schools had too. We had a hashtag Black at Groton Instagram response from our alumni. Trustees were involved, the whole community was involved, and suddenly there seemed to be an understanding of the urgency of the situation. And we completely reorganized ourselves. The Diversity and Inclusion Standing Committee divided itself into a curriculum working group and a residential life working group, and we had representation from all departments, and we've managed to do quite a lot of significant work since then, brought in residential life programming, have departments working together on conversations around curriculum, and the very latest iteration of this development is that the trustees have just come up with, a trustee faculty group have come up with a strategic plan that incorporates a lot of the work that we've been now doing, and so it is getting the backing and the importance it needs. So.
All right, I think I'll move on to the next question. Are there some general principles that your group agreed that it must build upon before you felt a more inclusive conversation could be had about DEI? For example, should white people examine their own racism before addressing it elsewhere, et cetera? Were there some principles that your group thought were bedrock? Allison.
Hi, so I think this is one of the bigger challenges, especially for a group that's all volunteer. And I think it's actually been something that's been difficult for the group to always agree on. But we did decide that at least there needed to be a basic understanding so that before anyone could join our ministry, the committee, that they did have to at least have done this curriculum that went over some of the key issues and the history. One of the question that Mary asked, should white people examine their own racism before addressing it elsewhere, is emphatically yes. The question is, that's really never done. It's a lifelong pursuit. So where do you, it's very difficult to have certain, okay, well, you hit this bar, you've done this many sessions or what have you, then you can go out and do more. So it's really been a very case by case in our situation, and it's been very, any sort of initiative that is proposed, we need to pause and examine what are we trying to do, what is our real motivation here, are we performing, are we just trying to get out there and lead because we think we know the right thing to do. So this is a real challenge, and one of the things that we are really trying to work on is helping us as white folks, speaking as a white person, to do less harm. So we're not going to get out there and create more harm in situations when we think we're trying to help. So I think it's a very difficult question to answer, but that's mine.
I remember one, building off of what Shivani was saying, and I know it was similar for many schools and institutions. It was this sense of immediacy and urgency. Sorry, James. Can you hear me now? There was this sense of immediacy and urgency, and all of that is true. But for our students, it was a very confusing time for them. Many lived by the iPhone and TikTok, and they were getting messages constantly. They were trying to sift through images that were triggering or traumatizing constantly. And they were looking for language that wasn't immediate. When you talk about identity, that's very complex language that just simply has to be reflected upon. It's not this binary way of thinking, and so shepherding young people through that was challenging at best. And so one of the skills before we were able to implement change, and we were doing our strategic plan, and we partnered with great thought leaders, and we made space in place, and all of that was necessary and important in building off of some of the strategic thinking that was already in place. But one of the things that I've been proud of, but that we've done really well, was taught kids how to listen. No one was listening. Everyone was talking, and everyone was talking loudly in many different forms and ways. And to slow down and be active listeners was an important skill before you could take the next step. And that wasn't a void of doing the internal work necessary. We know the importance of that, and we know the importance of making time for that, but to simply slow down and listen. And I think that that is a huge skill that sometimes gets overlooked in this work, because everyone has work to do. White folks have work to do. People of color have work to do. We're all reckoning with our bias. And so that was something that we really spent a lot of time on institutionally for the students and for the adults. We all sort of equipped ourselves with skills to be better listeners through such a complex and traumatizing time.
Any other responses for that, James?
I'm going to put this here. The last thing anybody needs is something that makes me louder and brings more attention to this. So, believe me, I'll handle it that way. The DEI committee, each member of the DEI committee is asked to read the Racial Healing Handbook once we become members. And this is a workbook in many ways, and it just helps people to work through I'm going to call it our racial convalescence. And why I like to call it that is that means there's time and growth and mistakes and all the things that we get tripped up on when we're trying to gain some maturity. And this is an act of maturity in many ways. I can't agree more about the idea of listening and hearing. Now, I, as a black person, I'm half black, I'm half Puerto Rican, identify more so with being black. I don't speak Spanish, but in reading this, I did oftentimes think, is this book for white people? Is this book for me? Is this book for black folks? But then I oftentimes started to reflect, well, yes, sometimes reading this became traumatizing for me, if you will, because I remember all of these feelings from just a very young age. But I also started to think back on how have I grown? How have I changed? I have a good friend from childhood who's Jewish, and he was the first Jewish person I met. And I sometimes think back of the questions I asked him and shake my head. Like, what was I thinking? And this helped me to remember some of those things as well. How do I treat women as a man? All of these things, all things that are under the umbrella of otherness, and that's how I like to put it. And that falls in so many ways between groups, and I think one of the sad things we don't talk about enough is within groups. I'll speak about myself again. The amount of conformity within the black community is amazing. And it's not something that's talked about, especially in the white community. Why would it be? But it is based on the same thing. So I think that's one of the great things that our group is doing and trying to grow as people.
So education, listening, recognizing otherness everywhere, those are some really good thoughts for us all to ponder. The next question is about the environment in which we live, Groton and Dunstable and surrounding towns, and some school populations are not terribly diverse in population. What challenges does this pose for your mission as a group? And I'll ask Sarvani to start with that.
So this is an interesting one because in terms of our school population, we are very diverse and very intentionally diverse. That's been a focus for Temba Makibala. I just looked up the statistics just before I came just to remind myself, but we are now 46% students of color, 9% international students, 25 states represented. So in a way, it's a bubble within the town of Groton. I think within the school we are doing well. It's very contained, our lives. In terms of the town, we don't have too many town gown events. This is wonderful to be here. It's very hard for me to talk about, life outside of town, but I would say inside the school, we have met with many of these challenges by completely changing the way we do our admissions, and we are slowly working on our faculty to Groton's remoteness is a challenge to bring in a wide diversity of faculty, places of worship, you name it, right? If you're a school like Andover or near a bigger city, it's much easier. So we are working on it, it's slow. Our student body has diversified much quicker and is growing by the day. It's been wonderful, and I'd say the faculty is sort of work in progress for us right now. So.
Thank you. Rafi, were you ready to speak?
So, let's see. This one's going to be a long one, too. I am one of the only ones of my colleagues who is a proud graduate of this district. I graduated Groton Dunstable Regional School District in 2010, and my first superintendent was none other than the fantastic, fabulous Prescott community head, Mary Jennings herself. But it's interesting because back then when I was a student and I went to Swallow Union, the middle school, I knew this district before the high school was built, and my friends went to school in this very school as well. That's how old I am. But I could probably count on one hand, just one, of how many people of color were here when I was a student. I remember certain incidents behind those doors, strictly myself being, I don't want to use the word victim, but being caught in the crossfires of certain situations, racial, obviously. But it's different than it is today. Never did I feel unsafe or dangerous or the like with this type of stuff. And not that it's okay, but it's clearly a different world than it was, which is why, for me, as a former student and resident of Dunstable, it's important to do this type of work so people like me and who look like me don't have to deal with that kind of stuff going through their grades 1 through 12. It's no easy feat. Like people have already mentioned, it took until 2 years ago for these very institutions to be brought about. So there's a lot of work to still be done, but there's a lot of work that has already been done. So when I go through, and luckily enough for me, I'm touring the Middle School South tomorrow, Middle School North on Wednesday. And when I toured Florence Roach and Swallow Union last year, walking through those halls and seeing the immense 180 of diversity from when I walked those halls is very, it just makes me feel good, you know? So it makes me feel good that we're doing this stuff, and you know, people won't have to, quote unquote, suffer in silence, right? So, yes, sometimes it is tough. This work is very tough, no matter where you are or what city or town you're in. But it's people like this, organizations like this, that, and our audience, that comes together to make it somewhat of a success. So, you know, I thank my panelists and everyone here as well.
Allison, would you choose
Yeah,
to respond to? Thank
I
you.
just wanted, our experience in a faith community is different than most other folks in this panel. And when I thought about this question, one of the big challenges I find is, and I would really be interested if those in town especially feel this, that there's a bit, because the community has been historically rather homogenous, that there's an invisibility to the diversity that exists within the communities. So that, especially, for example, when families adopt children of other cultures, there's sometimes not a recognition around those cultural differences that may be there, or the different challenges that a biracial family might have in a more monogamous community. So we find a challenge often of this people feeling like they need more diversity in order to do this diversity work, but they don't recognize the diversity that they have in their community already. So.
Yes, Rafi, follow up, and then
I was just going to say, if I
James.
could just add one more thing quickly. I would give, for this question, also a shout out to the disability community in town, and strictly the CPAC group from the school district. Many times, many calls and emails I get from constituents, whether they be from Dunstable or not, Groton as well. You know, it's about, you know, DEI is not just about religion or skin color or who you love and et cetera. It also, you know, it's many things, many tentacles going everywhere. So, you know, for that community, it is hard for them sometimes to be heard at the table, even though they have a special seat with a name placard, for others to understand what those families and their children go through daily. And it's not always the easiest. So I just want to also, you know, plug in for everyone in the community. Talk about inclusion, right?
Thanks, James.
I think a good question to ask is, why do we live here? We've all chosen, I would say most of us have chosen to move into this community, knowing it was not diverse. I'm kind of laughing at this question in some ways, because I look at the panel and the panel is so much more diverse in our community. And that's good. Diversity is important. But as a committee, with the DEI committee, we have to think about all people in the community. And there are people in this community who moved here because it's white. That's what they wanted, and that's fine. We still have to work with community. That's a diversity of thought. And that's important as well, making sure we have a diversity of thought, which goes back to listening to others and how we can find ways to work together.
Right. Thank you very much, and for reminding us that DEI goes beyond race, which were some of the lead-off questions here. It is really about all people being equal. Going on, the language of diversity can be difficult. What terms have you decided to use? For example, white supremacy or white privilege, and how do you define them? How did you walk sometimes this minefield of language?
So this is actually a very appropriate question to build off of what Rafi and James were saying. So we talk about it as historically underrepresented. We recognize neurodiversity for us at Lawrence Academy is huge. We have about 120 students in our community who have learning profiles, and they excel and thrive in our community. And so they too are included under that historically underrepresented umbrella. So we have affinity groups, for example, that represent all identity and religion, and we include that as a component of diversity. Because we have the opportunity to be a community that, as an educational community, it's incumbent upon us to define terms and make those terms accessible for all community members. So we don't shy away from language at all. We rather call folks in. And there's an opportunity that we have that's important for us to make sure that we are accessible to the community. So each term, Lawrence Academy is divided into 3 terms, so fall, winter, and spring. Each term, we invite the community in DEI community conversations to make sure that we are explicit with the implicit work that's taking place in the community. And so we use that as an opportunity to define terms and language as well. So recently during the fall, we talked about gender. We did some great thinking work and used a Local Deeds book and memoir as a tool for discussion around gender. And we defined what gender spectrum is. We defined what various, we used LGBTQ just as a way in which to express gender as an example of how that shows up in relationships. But we use that space to not only educate ourselves internally, but also externally to the community. So that's my plug and offer to invite community members to join our DEI community conversations, because that's our way of being explicit and defining language.
Any other comments on this particular question? Great, we'll move on then.
I have a comment.
Oh,
We
yes,
always
James.
do.
Yeah.
One of the things, defining terms, creating terms to help define situations is hugely important. But as we know, language is a growing thing, and sometimes it grows quickly. And what oftentimes happens is terms get defined, and the intent of those terms is rather benign. But oftentimes terms will change, the context will change. And so we have to be careful of when we have terms that are created, that those terms don't become nefarious. That if we're using a term like white supremacy, does that become a way for us to point to someone, to blame someone, which will then shut down discussion, which is what the terms were created to do, to open discussion.
Okay, thank you. Were there events in your town or institution that you needed to respond to quickly? And how did your group do this? This is beyond the murder of George Floyd. Were there any other events where you needed, as a group or as an official, where you needed to respond quickly, and how did you do it?
There, in the school district, have been, I think, a number of things that have occurred that have warranted some kind of conversation or discussion with the schools themselves, but in the broader community. And I think that as a district, we've recognized in the last year that the way in which we were thinking about doing so wasn't the right way to go about it. And I think that in the future, we've been thinking about and talking about what kind of protocols and procedures we can put in place to ensure that when something happens in our community, that is really a conversation with every member of our community, and that it's not necessarily, I think, as a lot of people on the panel have alluded to, not a checkbox, and it's not something that we did. It's something that we return to, and it's something that we think about as how it affects our school community as a whole and how it will continue to affect it. So the ways in which we've answered and responded to things have been typically through communication to different members of our community and to our students. But I think how we're trying to think about it moving forwards is less of a communication and more of a conversation of with different students of how did this affect you, how can we move forward, and how can we restore the relationships and the sense of belonging and accepting that we're trying to develop in the community.
Any other comments about particular events that may have occurred? Okay, thank you. I'm going to move to the very last question now. And I've asked each person to please respond to this, and then we'll go to questions and answers from the audience, leaving time for that. What is the single biggest barrier to achieving your mission? So if you could just briefly let us know what that might be, and we'll start with Sravani and go across the panel, please. Thank you.
Single biggest. I would say time. Our population, we pack a lot into our days and our terms, and we don't have time to slow down and do the meaningful work, to do the work of community in a way we'd like to. So I'd say time is like gold dust in our school. That is the biggest challenge. And if you ask me personally, I think it's the increasing, alarming, divisive language out there in 2024. I don't know. It's shifting ground the whole time under your feet in terms of language being appropriated and weaponized. It's all that is going on outside that is affecting our students and our communities. So.
I appreciate your approach of picking a word and trying to fit around that, so I'm going to try to do the same. And the word I thought of was misunderstanding, and I think it's from what you just spoke to and what you spoke to as well, James, and that I think for a lot of people there's an agreement of the values that we are trying to meet and what we're trying to develop in our community, but it's a misunderstanding of how to go about that and lack of cohesion in creating that shared sense of this is how we're going to come together. So I think kind of shoring that up and having more conversations about how to meet our goals would be helpful.
I would piggyback off what Andrew said, as we are part of the same umbrella, the schools. But I would also say that misunderstanding is a big one, I think, but also sometimes ourselves, and just instead of shutting it down or recognizing this is something new, to not be afraid of it and almost try and learn about it, try and embrace it. Like I said before, it is hard work, but if it's not uncomfortable, then I feel like we're not doing our jobs. So I want to just mention from the question above, too, if I might. As a public institution, are you more limited than a private school or nonprofit? And for us, it is very difficult because we have a lot of other factors that Lawrence Academy and Groton School or Lawrence Academy don't have, and that is one would be DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. We get our quote-unquote orders, guidance, whatever you want to call, from them. And since they are a state institution over education, we almost have to do what they say. If we don't, we could be losing funding or just get in trouble with various other offices. And no one wants the Commissioner of Education in Groton and Dunstable for that reason. But more so, we also have MASC, the Massachusetts School Committee Association, which our district is a part of. Not all school districts in the Commonwealth are. So again, we also get our advice and some of our policies straight from that organization as well. Luckily for us and everyone in here, both are very invested and supportive of the DEI work and initiatives. Part of the reason Andrew is here in general is because numerous districts around the state are sanctioning and making school districts have someone like Andrew. So, yes, there's a lot of red tape, and also we do have to follow Groton Dunstable Schools policies and what we can and can't do there, which is also a big other whole situation, various other red tape as well. So I tell the committee, yes, there are barriers, but it shouldn't deter us from what we are trying to do, and if anything, we'll just walk around them, so we will get it done. We just have to figure out how to get there. Thank you.
This is a tough question, but I think Ravi referenced it a minute ago. My answer is comfort. The biggest barrier is the overwhelming need to have white folks feel comfortable with the conversation that we're having, and the inability to, as Ravi mentioned, that discomfort is okay. So I think having people feel more curious about the discomfort and recognizing that their anger or their deflection or their whatever the reaction that they're having is just because of this discomfort, and pausing and listening and being curious about the discomfort, and stop prioritizing. It's very difficult in a community where you're offering volunteer education. There's no mandate for members of the congregation to work with us. And so, if it's a little uncomfortable, maybe they don't choose to do it. So that's a real difficult line to walk in a community like ours, where we don't want to cause a big upset in the congregation and a lot of reaction, but at the same time, we want to push and we want to encourage people to look into that discomfort and to allow that discomfort. So.
I mean, it's really an opportunity. It's not a barrier. Our mission is we recognize you for who you are and inspire you to take responsibility for who you want to become. And we do that with young people. And not just any young people, we do that from 14 to 19-year-olds. So right there, what a great opportunity, right? But I think what makes our community great is the same concept of opportunity or barrier. It's this idea that we're not cookie cutters, we're not robots, we don't make any claim that your kid is going to be the next fill in the blank. What we say is that when your kid steps into Lawrence Academy's campus, they are going to be recognized for them. And then wherever that starting point is, we're going to inspire them to take the next leap. For your child, that next leap may look like, Ivy League, wonderful. That might look like, the armed services, excellent. That may look like a D1 opportunity for hockey, and that is great too. And so when you're recognizing each individual member, and we have 413 young people, when you're recognizing each of them for who they are on any given day, that's an opportunity, an exhaustive opportunity to provide them with the skills necessary so that they can navigate this complex, global, ever-changing world. And for them, for our young people, they're changing rapidly. At any moment, the next great hashtag, song, TikTok, whatever, can come out and that focus will shift. And so as an institution that's claiming that they're going to recognize and inspire you, then your systems need to be lockstep. And so the barrier, the opportunity is making sure that we can structure a space where we're, as the adults or the support of the system, it's constantly providing opportunities to engage and meet those kids where they are. And we can't let up on that because they're changing, the world is changing around them, and we are saying to these families that we are going to recognize that change, and we're going to support you the whole way through. So it's definitely, like I said, an exhaustive opportunity, but that is what makes navigating that space complex and difficult for all of our kiddos, especially our historically underrepresented ones.
I'm going to change the word of barrier as well. I think it's a challenge, and I appreciate that challenge. And my group and myself we're willing to take that challenge on. But the biggest challenge for us is that we have to speak for the whole town of Groton. We have to think of 11,000 people, and of course, some people I'll start to use some education terms since I'm a retired English teacher. There are many people who want to approach this as if people have fixed mindsets, and we need to change that with many people so that we understand that people have a growth mindset, that we're more than willing to try and be patient, that teaching diversity is teaching. And I oftentimes think about how many people yell and scream, and I think about how poor of an example of teaching that is. How many people give up on people who say they're fixed. I can't get to that person. And as a teacher of high school English in Worcester public schools, I could never give up on a student. Not once. So I think of people, when I'm talking about diversity, especially when I'm talking about experiences as a black person to white people, never have a fixed mindset about those people, no matter how often they're shutting me out.
Thank you. And Rafi, could you follow up too?
Yeah, just quickly, not to make it about myself, but being one of the only ones from Dunstable in the room, I do have to give a plug to my town because, like Allison said, I am one of the children who was adopted by a white family. And I am also one of the only ones, if not the only one, who was a person of color, who is a Latino, and who was under 30, who was elected to be town moderator and on the school committee of this district. Not to mention, I'm also chair of the Democratic Party of Dunstable. So we may not have signs, that welcome people in our town, but I will say diversity, equity, and inclusion must be alive, as I am the result of it. So I do want to say thank you to my town and everyone else, for recognizing that and also being supportive of those very things. It's not easy, and I haven't seen it before, and I don't really see anyone running behind me after it. So hopefully we will lay the groundwork for someone like that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you all very much for taking that tough question of barriers, challenges, opportunities. I know it was very simplistic, but you gave very complex answers, and thank you so much. We're now going to open this to the audience for questions and answers, and we'll hope to have as much time as possible for you all to have at least one question. If everybody could have one question before they ask a second one. This microphone that I'm holding is for the Groton channel. It is not amplified for this room. And so I would ask that you would please come forward to this microphone if you are able. If not, I'll bring the microphone to you. So please just come forward and ask your question. Identify yourself.
Oh, I'm Leslie Lathrop. Before I get to my question, I have a quick question. You've been talking about people of color. Are you also talking about diversity, inclusion, equity, and inclusion for religious minorities? Okay, then I'll ask my question, because I know I'm not alone in feeling this way. Because don't forget that some diversity is invisible. Being gay is invisible. Being Jewish in this town is invisible. So I'd like to pivot to talking about that instead of race. As a Jew, I don't feel included in this town. Time and again, the town voices that it would prefer to have no Jews. And I can give you examples, but I'm not gonna. When my son went through the district, he felt so unincluded that he hid his Jewishness. Like he wouldn't observe Passover in school. Sad. This town has a Christian Bible on its seal, the school district utilizes a crusader, which literally means bearer of the cross, as its mascot, and the high school has what is essentially a Christian church choir which sings worship songs in churches. I know and I thank the town committee for attempting to change the seal, but this town shut it down, which makes me feel a lot less included. So what, if any, my question is, what, if anything, is being done to improve things, or should I resign myself to always being an outsider in the community that's been my home for nearly 38 years?
Well, as you know, I believe that the DEI committee was a catalyst of changing the seal, or at least of the attempt to change that seal, and bring that to the select board. And although it didn't win in that vote, I was very disappointed in that personally.
Excuse me, were you surprised?
I guess is surprise the word? No, I guess I want to say is I think about this. The positive I can take from this is thinking about what happened in the stories I've heard from, was it 5 years ago when they first started coming up? I think it was something of that nature, and that it moved to a vote of 52% to 48%. Now, I was disappointed. I put in a lot of work for this, and I was disappointed. But if I took a positive from that, or at least that's what somebody told me to try to take a positive from after I, was kicking things, I took that. But I will say, when you said we were talking a lot about race, and I think I generally talk about race with myself, this is why I like to use the word otherness. That's what I mean. Otherness covers so much, and I don't wish to exclude anybody who's being excluded, I guess would be the best way to put that.
The school people?
I'd first like to say that I'm sorry for the experiences that you've had in the district. We have, in our student groups, had a lot of conversations about these experiences, and specifically the mascot and the experiences of students, and having to go through that and to realize that that is a part of who they are just by being in the district. And we're certainly working to try and change that. I've had conversations with a lot of the people in the district, including teachers and students, about how they would like it most to be changed. The process is underway. The specifics of what has been changed, I don't know if I'm able to share. We've talked about the mascot, and we've talked about changing the choir trip and making sure that isn't happening. But it is really also in our student groups, and trying to develop a greater sense of advocacy for students themselves, but also between students, ensuring that others stand up for what is right.
Thank you.
Sure. My name is Nadia Madden, and I'm here partly as the co-president, along with Barbara here, as of the Groton Interfaith Council. We're an association of religious organizations and individual community members here in Groton, and our mission is to foster understanding, respect, justice, and peace among people of a variety of religious traditions through worship, fellowship, education, and service. And I think we've worked for quite a few years, a couple of decades now in the town, in trying to build more religious inclusivity. We are a religiously diverse group. I'm Muslim. My co-chair is ethnically Jewish and practices Buddhism and worships at the First Parish Church. And I think one of the things that we would like to know is how can we help. We are so excited to see all of these new diversity initiatives since the death of George Floyd emerge here in Groton. how can we help to support your work? And also for the schools, how can we help to support more inclusion, more religious diversity or understanding of religious diversity in the school? One thing that one of our members brought to a meeting recently was, I think for the Lincoln Public Schools, they have a whole list of all the religious holidays, and the teachers actually get that at the beginning of the year so that teachers know when the Jewish holidays are. They know when the Hindu holidays are, when the Muslim holidays are, when most of the major religious holidays happen, so that there's at least some attempt to plan around that and for people to be prepared for that. That would be a really wonderful step for, I think, for the Groton school system to embrace, and I'd love to hear lessons from Groton School and Lawrence Academy as well. But just a real simple step that we could probably all take.
So thank you for your question. Nice to see you again, Nadia. It's interesting. The DEI Advisory Committee for the district has done just that. At our 2 meetings ago, we had decided that I'm sure there are students and families in both towns that celebrate something other than Christmas and that celebrate something maybe other than Passover. We started to work through doing what you just mentioned, forming a calendar of events that would be not only distributed to staff and everyone in those buildings in the district, but it would consist of, and this is where it gets a little sticky, holidays, A through Z, anything under the sun. The problem is that list might be very lengthy.
Yeah.
And where does one stop? So in those conversations, we also wanted to put into place, what's the other thing called? Not observance is the other one. Yes, thank you, audience member. Acknowledgements of a week-long celebration, acknowledgements of a religion, same thing, but just make it more inclusive and for everyone to see. Before we could actually formally make a presentation, recommendation, and bring it back to the school committee and the superintendent, they have also already decided to take the horns of that issue and start to work through it. So I will let Andrew talk about that, but we are working, or we have started to work on that. Yes, that very thing.
Yeah, we've started talking about how the policy can reflect the experience where students and community members have something to refer to and know the expectations of that they will have the freedom to observe the observances, acknowledgements, or holidays as is necessary, and as the students need to be able to feel like an experience belonging in the community.
Shirani, do you want to go first?
Okay, sure.
No, because Groton School does an amazing job. So, I mean, we just go ahead.
So first of all, let me just say the importance of looking at our walls, looking at the images, looking at the language. All of this helps the dignity and respect that we are trying to sort of foster in our communities. And I think really we have a new chaplain called Alison Reed. I don't know if you know her, but she's paying a lot of attention to this. We are an Episcopal school with a chapel right in the middle of our campus. We are treading a really very nuanced path. As is many schools of our type, she works with a spiritual life team. She has a Muslim leader. We bring in someone from outside for our Hindu students, and we have a Jewish faculty member who leads the charge there. And I think what we are trying to do is to create space, make sure we offer different religious practices. That's the way we are proceeding right now. Have calendar time, have speakers come in during important holidays and speak to our community. That's the kind of progress we are making. And I feel like in terms of how can you help, I would love to hook you up with my chaplain and our spiritual life team and see where we can go from there, because I know one of our colleagues goes to your church and has found that really important. I would love more of this kind of threading and communication.
And we at Lawrence Academy, we have the all religious holidays and acknowledgments on our calendar for planning, and there's a process and protocol for that. We have an interfaith religious group. We're lucky to have Aaliyah has come on our campus, or we've sent kiddos there. Father Mahar, who I know goes to do the work with the Catholic identifying students at Groton School, also works and partners with our students as well. I mean, Amy Deegan that has done amazing work. Last year we showed a film, and she was able to educate our students around Holocaust remembrance, and those. I think for us it's about educating for a global world and a global society. We don't have, we're not religiously affiliated, but we do understand that when we have students from all across the world, it's incumbent upon us to provide those educational entry points. And so, Nadia, whatever we can do or not do, we are open to, in also building off of the work that's currently taking place. So yeah, anything.
Well, obviously, we're not an educational institution, and you sort of started to address that question, but my question was more around the place of this in the curriculum, that I think, so my daughter goes to the Parker Charter Essential School, so we're sort of a blend of the public and the private, and watching her have different experiences of learning about world religions, sort of in depth, it's opening her mind, because I think this is again to that invisibility that I talked about before, that because it seems like a monogamous community, it's very easy to overlook that diversity. So an educational component, I don't know how the interfaith could work with the public schools, if that's even appropriate, but it sounds like education's happening in the private schools, but I don't know how much in the public school and how much you're hampered by the curriculum requirements that you have. But
may I piggyback on that just a little bit before you answer, Rafi? I was going to ask a similar question, so I'm glad you brought that up, Allison. I was wondering if there is a possibility in the school district to have a comparative religions course. It could be an elective, or at least elective has started. It could be part of the history department. But I want to make sure I'm clear on this. When I was teaching, I had 5 different principals, and all of my 21 years were in Worcester. And as in a community that diverse, I asked 4 of my 5 principals if I could teach a comparative religion class, and all of them turned me down. In fact, one was a colleague of mine and an AP history teacher, and when I asked our principal about this and told him, he said, "That's a fantastic idea." When he was my principal, he turned it down. So I understand that could be a challenge, but I'm wondering if there's anything like that.
So there's 2 things. One is the school committee does not deal with curriculum, so I can't answer that. But to answer your question, Nadia, in terms of if you can help as a religious outlet organization, we use what website did you use to find all the acknowledgments? The ADL website. So we pull stuff off from, DESE, ADL, so for these purposes, I would say research or just gathering information. I don't think that's an issue, but we will look into that so we don't violate any policies. Thank you.
Sorry.
You ready for
I'm really struggling with this mic, but very quickly, spirituality is one of the pillars of Groton, so we have an entry-level 9th grade class called Sacred Traditions and World History, and our students learn about the major world religions, all of them, and spend equal time on all of them. So it's one of our very oldest and precious courses. So.
Thank you all.
Nikki Rockwell, I'm from Dunstable. First of all, I want to change the mindset around what is DEI. I actually think the majority of the people who live in Groton Dunstable qualify under that. Why do I say that? It may have to do with religion. It may have to do with your sexual preference. It may have to do with your learning disability. It may have to do with all of these things. And having been a teacher here, guess what? Those kids have those things. And I think that we do a huge disservice to try to segregate. That's been tried. It wasn't very successful. To segregate groups from each other and to limit our understanding to say, oh, it's whites who can't deal with racism, when in fact they're dealing with a multiply handicapped child at home, and what are we doing to help them? Okay, so I think that I just want to clarify my point of view, which is that DEI is much bigger than we ever give it credit for. I also want to speak to the fact that when I was hired, I had a resume. And I'm pretty sure Mary had to look at it at one point. And she saw on there that I was trained with peer mediation, that I was trained with peer leadership, that I was trained in facing history and ourselves by the ADL and World of Difference. Okay, when we talk about, I'm white as anything, I admit that. I've been white all my life. I, never had that opportunity to change, I know. What can I do, So, but my point here being that, it's like during the women's movement at the beginning, it used to be consciousness raising, well, guess what? That's what this is. We're going to raise our consciousness all of our lives to try to be open and more loving and more kind towards each other. But what I want to say is when we look at who is our staff, people look at, are they people of color or not? I want to say, let's look at their resumes. How have they been trained? What are they bringing to our students? Okay? I'm noticing that a tremendous amount of young teachers are coming in. Why? Cheap. They're cheaper. They're cheaper. They don't have the wisdom. They don't have the experience. By the time I left Groton Dunstable, I'd had 36 years of teaching facing history and ourselves. When I walked out that door, who picked up the mantle? Who's teaching it now? It's back to the Diary of Anne Frank in its play form. Not what happened to Anne Frank after they got found. Not what happened to all the thousands and millions of other children who were murdered in camps. Okay? So I am deeply concerned that I think it's wonderful to educate adults. I wish every adult was open to education. But our future is our children. And I see closed doors happening all the time. Oh, good, she's gone. We don't have to teach that anymore. And, I know ADL is in there. I appreciate the work that they do. But that's a very small group of people it reaches. And even if some of the high school students are going down to talk to some of the 8th graders, it's not enough. It's not enough for the kid who sits in class and is dealing with not eating during a fasting period of their religion, and tests are being given to them and a load of homework is coming, and no one has ever explained what Ramadan is. Okay? And I think the study of religion is allowed, and I push that limit over and over again. The last thing I want to say is, all are welcome does not mean all are welcome. In fact, it kind of offends me when I drive through, because it isn't true that all are welcome. And I actually prefer living in Dunstable, where it's damn clear not all are welcome. Okay? Well, it's true. So, and sometimes I feel that way. Okay, I know, I'll come on, I'll stop. But I do want to look at the language piece, okay, which is in DESE's description about support of DEI. It says, culturally responsive teaching. Think about those initials and think about why there's tremendous outrage in our community about critical race theory. It's exactly the same initials. And talk about shoot yourself in the foot. People really need these definitions explained, and what does that really mean? You don't ask the Indian kid who comes to school committee, do you like having pizza for lunch? Because that was my favorite lunch. And he looks and he goes, well, my mother makes my Indian food for me every lunch. That's an example of cultural insensitivity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, Becca Tabaski. I'm so grateful for all of the work that you do. It's so hard, it's so crucial, and so I appreciate it, and I appreciate your time to come and talk to us about it. There are a couple of elements of things that I have for questions, some that relate to like individual versus structural, and then as it relates to like solidarity movements and how we can confront that in our towns. And so thinking through some of the challenges that I've heard, whether it's teaching a certain class or having certain restrictions put on at state levels, thinking about the power structures that we have in town that go beyond the individual but that are entwined with the individual, right? We have a superintendent in the Groton Dunstable schools who calls it hearsay that black children are chased out of the school, that there's lots of swastikas and it's not addressed at levels that are like responsive and appropriate. From my perspective, we have queer kids who are teased, folks who are disabled who don't get the training, the support that they need, and then teachers, right, who aren't getting the support that they need in those spaces. And I'm curious like where those individual things butt up against the school board, how the schools work, and where the community as individuals can confront both that individual type of thing and the structures of power that exist. And this goes beyond the schools too. I think this goes to the town when we have incidences of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, when things are happening across the state. And in Massachusetts, the incidences of hatred are growing exponentially. We know that NS 131, which is a white supremacist neo-Nazi group, was founded by a 23-year-old guy who lived in Pepperell, the town next door. When these things come to light after they, chase down queer folks at drag story hours, and we ask our leadership in the town of Groton, not Dunstable, what to do about it or how we deal with it, we get a lot of silence. And there are a couple of people on the board who've taken that seriously, who have talked about it, and we have others, when asked about hate in town, say, "I've not observed any." And when pressed on it, say, "I've not observed any." So what role do all of the groups that you represent and play a role in, how can you take on the structures of power both at individual levels and at systems levels, and where can the community work in solidarity with one another to support the groups to show up together and to try to get better and different responses to these types of incidences, because they are happening, and I think we need to be more vocal in sort of decrying, not accepting, and denouncing, one, while also educating, teaching and learning, making sure people feel welcome on the other hand. Thank you.
Can I address that?
Thank you, Rebecca. Do you want to address that, James?
I do. Thank you, Rebecca. One of the things the DEI committee is working on, and in truth, I think you had a part in bringing, in at least starting this. So thank you so much for bringing up this idea. Is we're trying to create for the select board, which would then be for the town, a hate incident action plan. We're in the midst of that. It's messy. There's a lot of difficulty in that. How do we determine what is a hate incident that the town will respond to? What's the difference between a hate incident and a hate crime? What can we do what can the select board do as a group? What would we like to see them do? Do we want the select board in some way to formally reach out to people who feel victimized by this? And what would that look like? So much work to do on this, so much. But that is absolutely one of the things that we are addressing as far as systems are concerned. We do have incidences that have happened, but we are also trying to be preemptive is the word I'm looking for. On if something greater happens in our town, can we be prepared to respond to that? At least in making the proper statements and showing that everyone is included. The problem with hate incidences is that the second a hate incident happens, there's someone who literally feels disconnected from the group. It happens instantly. I'm them, I'm not us anymore. And how can we bring that person back into the fold? That is hard to do when it happens. And so we're looking at ways to do many things about that.
We have 2 other people waiting to ask questions. So after this, we'll conclude our panel, unless there's someone else that wants to get in line. Our time is almost at an end. So 2 more questions, and we'll wrap up.
Hi, Owen Schumann. So Nikki alluded to it, and I think that when we hear about Groton School and the headmaster Macabella, you think about leadership from the top, you know, how we affect change and how we understand inclusion, whether it's learning or whatever inclusion is, and we've learned some things today. My question to the panel is, what's being done for those who are leading to learn? So the superintendent or the teachers or the select board, what are they studying, reading? How are they learning about what we've talked about today? And I'm open, and Allison talked about, and I'm a member of First Parish Church, so we had 72 people read and learn and say, I didn't know this, why didn't I know this? So I just want to know, in the school system, with the select board and whatever, how we get people to learn. Anybody?
I think the first step for us in the school district at the top level with the superintendents was in an anti-bias training that they took last fall. Though I think there was a recognition from that training that the conversation wasn't broad enough and wasn't deep enough in what it covered, as it was just essentially explaining what implicit and explicit biases, what microaggressions were, and how they manifest, and what the structural, how they manifest structurally. So the conversations from there are even more so about, we've started talking about culturally relevant pedagogy, which was brought up before. I have provided them with a couple readings and a couple conversation points from works from Dr. Gloria Latson-Billings, and Dr. Kim Parker came in actually on October 11th, had a conversation about literacy and culturally relevant pedagogy, which was amazing. But I think there is a recognition that the conversation isn't deep enough and isn't broad enough, and that it needs to be continued.
All leaders of our school, trustees, academic leadership team, the strategic leadership team has ongoing training as our faculty and staff participate in equity and inclusion groups, and so that is the scope and sequence that is intentionally designed, and we take them through. It's all mandatory training. You can't be an academic leader or a trustee or a part of the administration without doing the training. It's ongoing, so it's not one and done. Each term there is something for the teachers, for our teaching faculty. It's ongoing throughout the year. For our leaders in our school, our leadership team, it's mandatory for the first 3 years. Each summer they have to participate in SEED or a various racial healing handbook. We still use that tool internally, so it's ongoing mandatory training for all educators in my community in addition to staff.
That's impressive, Raquel. Thank you.
Sir Bonnie, if you'd like to finish.
I wasn't sure if we were all weighing in, but ours is not as structured as Lawrence Academy, but it's on the same lines. We definitely get in speakers, and Raquel's helped me with that. All faculty training. I found gathering around a book and having conversations very, very useful. I think one of the most powerful ones we read was Cost, and I cannot remember the historian's name off my head. Say that again. Can anyone Yeah. I mean, I think gathering people around a book is very, very important. Bringing in speakers is important. And it's such a hit and miss. Sometimes a speaker lands very well, sometimes absolutely not. So what we are now trying to have regular conversations from people from the inside, and sometimes we hear our colleagues much better. So just different ways to not let the conversation drop off the radar.
Just quickly too, from the school district, similar to before the advisory committee was formed, myself and the superintendent and sometimes all of our colleagues would take professional development with a group that was hired by the district for 6 sessions to, talk about this stuff, learn it more in depth. It doesn't do anyone a service, though, if you don't show up. So I know the school district, Andrew, you can correct me if I'm wrong, has also been doing some PD with their professional development, with their staff meetings or half days. Some of it has to do with this very work, DEI stuff. But I would agree, there could always be more. And the other Dunstable representative, my colleague, Lacey McCabe, actually just spent the week at the Massachusetts Association of School Committees conference that was about professional development for school committee members. And some of those lessons were about DEI. And it is her hope, it's still in the works, that she will come back and give a report and potentially move that we as a committee do that, whether it be a yearly thing or our new members right when you're elected, some sort of training like that. Yes, it has been talked about. Thank you.
So I guess I'm between you and being able to escape from here. So my last question is organization. Oh, sorry. I'm Phil Francisco from here in Groton. My last question is also organizational, and it's somewhat along the lines of what Shravani just spoke to, and it has to do with what lessons have you taken as leaders of the DEI organizations that you have within each of your own institutions. What lessons have you learned in terms of what things worked for your organizations and what things didn't work? What things did you try that just you hit a stone wall on and you had to back up and say, we need to take a different approach? I'm asking this as someone who's working in DEI for another organization that I work with, and I'd like to understand and learn from some of the learnings that you've had. So I'd love to hear some of the things that you've encountered that were positive and also some of the things that you hit were stumbling blocks.
So I think personally what I've learned is not to look for perfection. Things go really badly sometimes, but there's still ground gained in that. What I'm personally learning also is to not depend too much on outside speakers and outside professional development, but to try and get the messaging in from inside, which actually means having a very strong core team that is constantly getting educated, going to professional development, having conversations within themselves, then using that to go into every department and program and do your... I would rest it at saying it works best when there's a diversity of voices inside your organizations and not just one voice or just two people speaking on it. That's what I feel has worked the best.
I really appreciate that because I feel like I learned something there that's really important and how I'm going to go back to work tomorrow. I think I would certainly agree with the sentiment, and CPAC had a speaker a couple weeks ago that spoke to this a little bit as well, that diversity, equity, inclusion, work initiatives, conversations can't be fronted and faced by one person. I think currently that's something we're struggling a little bit with in the district, in identifying our team and identifying how we make sure that these conversations are pervasive and that everyone is having them at the same time and all the time.
Similar and parallel to Andrew. One of the biggest things I've learned as a school committee member and now the chair of the actual DEI committee is over communication is key. We are in, one might say, a small rut with our charter. The way certain things are written, whether they be in the interest of everyone and a good idea, when you give it off to someone else, they read it as something completely different. And it makes them nervous, it makes them unsure, which then comes as defensive and all the excuses of why not to do it. So to bypass all that, what I've learned is it's not 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 times. Repeating yourself never hurts. And as long as you're on the same page with anything, take DEI out of it, it's much easier to move together as a cohesive unit. So, that kind of goes a little bit to letting certain people, do what they're charged to do, and almost trusting them with that work. But you're right, sometimes it is difficult. Thank you.
So I learned 2 things in this work. The first thing is that it's not a cookie cutter approach when you're doing this work for communities. And having done this work in different regions and areas and socioeconomic groups, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So learning what's going to be best for your community. But then the humbling part, I think, of this work is learning that you have growth to do yourself. And there's nothing that I put forth in my community, whether it's working on bias or right now we are looking at curriculum. And so I'm alongside my community, reading, growing, shepherding myself, because the moment, while I'm the expert and I'm the leader, I'm very much the student. And so I need to humble myself always. And I think sometimes in this work, it becomes very much a you, us, this, them. And oftentimes it's from the person who's supposed to be leading the inclusivity. And so it's the humbling factor of working alongside your community and providing the skills so that you can grow together. And like I said, and that's tricky, but it's also, it causes folks like Shivani and to be doing this work for 20 plus years. It's long, and you must sustain yourself, and there's ways to do that.
Well, I would echo that as the humility, I think, is really, really important, that we're coming into this work because we think it's important, but we don't have all the answers, and especially if we're coming from a white body, a white person's perspective, we're amateurs in the areas, at least regarding race. But also that it's to take a long time, that it requires a lot of personal growth and personal change in order to change systems and culture, and that it is messy, especially in the shorter term. So not to be patient and to go slow. I think our culture wants us to go fast. We've achieved our objectives. We have KPIs and all these things but this is transformational work that you need to, okay, things blow up, okay, pause. Like, why did it blow up? What happened? Patience, humility, and letting it be a little bit messy, and calling people in. It gets messy because people get upset, and so you kind of, okay, we call people back in again and start again, and so.
I couldn't agree more with everyone who spoke about this, quite honestly. All of that is true in all of my experiences. One of the things I find challenging is messaging, and how we are trying to get groups of people, and when to speak to people's emotions, and when then to speak to people's rational thinking, and then when to speak to our common values, and how we can try our best to know the audience that to which we're speaking, and what we're going to appeal to when doing so. That's always hard because, the larger your group, the more diverse your group is, and then the messaging one type of message may not appeal to everybody in that group. I wonder sometimes, for instance, when the town seal was up and we approached that, I sometimes wonder if the messaging may have been too logical at times. And that doesn't mean those are bad arguments, right? People saying, well, the Constitution, we want separation, church and state. That's all well and good, but if someone is out there and they just love the Bible so much that they don't want it don't want to see that removed, then a different messaging has to be done to that person. So I find that to be challenging.
Well, we're going to end our panel now, but I want to say, as an individual, and perhaps I'm speaking for some of you here, that I appreciate so much you're representing your organizations so excellently. But most of all, I appreciate how in the last hour and a half we've gotten to know you a little bit better personally. I really appreciate your sharing some of your own personal experiences with us. We know you better, and we as citizens will perhaps now have access to your organizations better because we have access to you as people. So thank you so much. I want to thank you. I'll conclude that this is being taped by the Groton channel, and it will be shown on Monday. So we'll let you, the organizations, and you know when that's going to be shown, so you can share this if you'd like. And Rafi, last word.
Sorry, I would just like to say thank you to the moderator, Mary Jennings, but I would ask a tiny favor. You might consider inviting us back either next year or sometime soon for another check-in and see where we are, and I hope to work with my panelists and our own DEI coordinator later, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.